Good evening and welcome. Welcome to Monash Law Chambers here in the city of Melbourne. I'm Jon Faine and I'm hosting an In Conversation series, and tonight we have the absolute pleasure, and I'll introduce in a moment, Shaun Micallef is joining us. Before we go too far, I want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And also, on a personal note, I express my impatience for a treaty or treaties in order to try to address some of the mistakes that we've made in our past, without which it's my personal view that we can't move forward. The In Conversation series for Monash Law have been, needless to say, somewhat interrupted by the tumultuous events of the pandemic. But we have, for the first time, very excited to say, tonight we have got a live audience. So thank you very much to everybody here in the city chambers. Make a noise so we know that you're there. That's pathetic. You can do much better than that. But without any further ado, and I'll just quickly point forward, next week, next Thursday at lunchtime, Justice Jenny Coate is our guest in the In Conversation series. So that's coming up. But tonight, Shaun Micallef, star of stage and screen, of documentary, of comedy festivals, and also hidden deep in his CV, Shaun is yet another recovering lawyer. Shaun, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you, Jon. I need to correct you. I'm sorry to introduce this sadness so early in our discussion, but you got something wrong in the intro. I've never done a comedy festival.
Haven't you?
Never done one.
Would you like to?
No.
I know people. We can have a word to them.
No, too much competition. I, to be honest with you, I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't want to risk people not turning up. I mean, imagine performing before a crowd of, 20 people. It'd be terrible. Awful. You've
been performing doing your television show, which normally does have an audience. For how long now have you been doing it with that one?
Oh, yes. Well, the last, we had a little space earlier this year. We had 3 weeks worth of an audience. But either side of that, for basically 2 years, we've lost our studio audience. So it was very interesting for us, having done 9 years with one and being match fit for an audience and being designed and built for that purpose, to suddenly lose them because we were told the night before that we couldn't have an audience.
And what difference does it make? Well, to you, not just to the people who are viewing on television.
Oh, well, as a performer, it ends up being reducing the performance to a technical exercise. So I'm sitting there doing the show and thinking, oh, I can edit that, and it's not much more exciting than sitting in the edit suite. So I don't get that instant validation, that pathetic need for validation that I crave as an actor.
Come on, validate. He's inviting you.
Oh, that's better. Yeah, thank you.
How long have you been so needy, Shaun?
I think there's obviously something in my matrix that I've thought about this. I have thought recently about what it is that drives somebody to take to a stage and to entertain, in this case, 20, 25 very nice people, but I don't know them. You're all strangers to me. So why the need for validation from strangers? Why
they could be complete lunatics, couldn't they?
Well, I suspect. I mean, what is it? What time is it? 6:05?
Yeah.
6:05 on a Thursday?
Yeah.
And you've chosen to come here. But for
people
some,
with nothing else in their lives.
Clearly. Students, clearly. But you're probably glad to get out of the house. I mean, are you back in the lecture halls and the tutorial rooms, or are you still at home?
Not yet. This is the highlight of the year, really, tonight, isn't it? Yeah.
This is kind of like a lecture, isn't it? It's kind of like a tutorial with an old professor. And
what do you mean pointing at me?
All right. Well, with an old professor, and
I'd be emeritus. I'm that old. Yeah.
Have you ever taught?
Yes, I did a semester teaching at Monash Law School.
Did any students here?
No, not then. It was a very long time ago.
Oh, they've gone on.
I did a semester teaching professional practice, which is in the clinical legal service at Springvale. I loved it.
You're going to go back to it?
I would relish the opportunity to teach again. And
you used to be on radio, didn't you?
For a little while, yeah. And that transaction where you exchange something and you see that, you actually do see that flicker of lightning in the eye of the student when they get something. I mean, we used to have standard situation, student go out and see someone who's had a car crash and they'd come back and say, I just saw this woman's had a car crash. You go, okay, what's the law? And is there a car crash act? No. Is there a trust? Is it a relationship of a trust and a beneficiary? No. Well, what is it? What's the law between two cars and drivers that crash? What is the relationship? And they'd go, oh, I learned that stuff years ago. I've forgotten all that now. And then you get people to actually process. You must have gone through those moments in your
Well, that's all the law I did, because I practiced for 10 years.
doing
Crash, bash, ouch. That's what we were doing.
insurance law.
But we acted for the, this is in Adelaide in South Australia, so this is the State Government Insurance Commission.
So you were always for the defendant?
Yeah, always.
Never did a plaintiff job?
No.
Always for the bad guys?
Always sitting there with the, I was one of those guys that that would borrow the canister of film from the case that was going on next door and just put it next to my chair so that the plaintiff thought we had some film on him or her. So if they felt guilty or so, they might settle, because most of them settled. This is back in the 80s, so most of them settled. You turn
So these were common law claims for injuries?
Yes, you turn up and you'd have, yes, that's right. There's a cap on it now. I don't think many of them do go to trial now, but it was the bread and butter of the firm that I was at. And it's a fused profession, so I was able to put the furry hat on and wear a cloak and everything, and it was almost like dressing up and appearing in the theatre. So
it is very theatrical, is it not?
Well, yeah,
these are the common elements.
And it still is. Do we still get to wear wigs? Is that
no?
No, really?
No,
that's a pity. What? Nowhere in Australia? Surely federal court.
No, federal court was the first to abolish them in the High Court. Yeah.
Well, that's a pity. What about a jabot? Do you still get to wear a jabot?
Yeah, you can wear a bib.
A bib, yes,
dribble your suit down and all the rest of it. Yeah,
I did. My grandfather was when I was studying law, he was very keen to buy me my robes and wig that I would need as a barrister. He thought they were very expensive,
Was it a hard decision to walk away from it all?
Well, having done 10 years, it was easier. I think because I was one of and you'll love this. You always love it when boomers tell you how their education is free. I was on the TEAS system, the Tertiary Education Allowance Scheme. You're probably on it yourself, John.
No, I had a scholarship.
Oh, well done to you. So I was getting.
Hang on, I'll just chalk that one up. Yeah, it's probably the only one I'm going to get on that. Yeah.
No, that's no, that is commendable. That is commendable. But I didn't have that. So I was getting a couple of $100 every fortnight, I think, from the federal government to spend on records and beer
and dope,
essentially, and whatever was available. And
sorry, I just gave away far too much, didn't I?
You went to that pretty quickly, John.
Yeah. Well, that was Monash in the 80s. Hey, come on.
Well, this was
the 70s, dare I say it? Oh my God, I'm that old.
This was Adelaide University in the 80s, so we were very well behaved. So my point being that that's right, yeah. So it was free. It was free, and I did feel at the end of my degree, when I was working, say 2 or 3 years in, that I did kind of owe it to somebody, owe it to the taxpayer, owe it to the community within which I was living, to honour that compact that we had, that I would actually follow through and practice law in some way. So the firm I was at did some pro bono work. I did a little bit of criminal work. But mainly it was for SGIC, or what would here be? The
State Government Insurance Commission, it probably was it? Yeah.
Yes.
So what was it that triggered your departure and your wandering off? I mean, the law is littered with stories of people, whether it's, the Rumpoles or, John Bryson from Evil Angels, or, we could rattle off lists of hundreds of names of people who have gone off, particularly to the arts. But what was it for Shaun Micallef?
Well, it was probably one of the things that attracted me to it. I think I went into the law because I'd seen To Kill a Mockingbird. I like the noble, character of Atticus Finch.
And there you were doing Crash and Batch in Adelaide.
It wasn't quite the same thing, but as I said to you before, it's very theatrical. You get to dress up, and there's either that or the clergy. There's a certain amount of theatre in both those things. But the costumes are very similar.
Yeah, and you get to stand up, and everybody watches you.
Everybody watches you, and also the law school was a pretty exciting place if you were a performer, because there was a pretty healthy footlights club. So I was doing that, probably doing too much of that. In fact, I would probably do that at the expense of the study. So we're doing 3 shows a year. As soon as exams were finished, perhaps during exams, we'd be rehearsing and writing material and putting a show on very quickly. And it's not much different to what I'm doing now. It's just a bigger train set now. Still wasting taxpayers' money, still putting on reviews essentially.
You heard that at
television.
Senate estimates, did you? Yeah, I heard that too.
Yeah. Who was that? Erica Betts? Did he make an observation?
Had a big cheerio to him too. Yeah. So, I mean, I do want to, at least because this is put on by the law school.
Sure.
And I want to just dwell a little bit on teasing out this extraordinary thing where within, I think it's the study, if I remember it correctly, within 5 years, only about 10% of law graduates are working in the law.
Oh, really?
And the rest have wandered off to some other
Has it always
realm.
been so?
It's been so for quite a while.
Is that because there's so many lawyers and not as many positions?
There is an oversupply of graduates, but there's also a shortage in some areas, and it's really interesting. You know, there's a shortage of lawyers who will go and work in the bush, for instance, particularly in remote communities and in the areas where it's needed, Aboriginal legal aid and things like that. But there's any number of people who want to queue up and, you know, become millionaires. So there's a really obvious disconnect. But I think it's also about the creativity, the creative juices that are exercised as it was with you when you're an undergraduate.
Well, I have no training as a performer or a writer at all. My only training is my law degree, and for which I'm very thankful, because it is if nothing else, and it isn't, there are many other things, but if nothing else, it enables you to solve problems and look at any given situation. It's like being given an exam paper. You look at any given situation, you go, okay, well, there's these 8 things or 10 things or 15 things, and you sort each one out individually, and then by some miracle at the end of it, the entire problem has gone away. And what I did leave law school with was an instinctive ability to do that and apply it to any other given situation. So when I write for television, I'm still using, I think, the same skill set that I picked up and had honed at law school.
But don't you think it's a bit like learning to drive a car? You get your license, but you really only start to drive when you're out there on your own behind the wheel going, what do I do next? And it's that next little while where you become a driver. And I found learning law was one thing, but practicing, I learned so much more day by day once I was out there. And the things you learn are more nuanced. It's things like not to be bluffed. How to negotiate, how to analyse a problem in real time, not in a library in theory, but in practice.
Yes, you do.
How not to be bullshitted by somebody who's trying to pull the wool over your eyes.
I never worked that out. I was always a bit too trusting, probably a bit too naive, because I got out when I was maybe nearly 30, and I still don't think, I think probably in an arrested way, I hadn't become cynical. I was still quite idealistic. So if someone told me something, I'd believe them. I just assume, well, you know, you wouldn't be misrepresenting the situation to me.
I'll talk to you later about your superannuation. I've got this really, really good deal going.
I know the penny's dropped since. I reckon it would be very interesting. I don't think I can get back from here, but it'd be very interesting to practice the law now. In fact, I kind of enjoy those moments that occur just running a household where you can force it into some sort of legal confrontation. I quite enjoy it. Somebody's planted a tree that's a bit too close to the fence, that sort of thing. I'm one of those guys.
Are you hinting that you're missing it?
I miss the fact that it's important. I mean, I think what I'm doing now doesn't feel very important. It feels,
really?
Yeah, I mean, it's not important. It's kind of it's fun.
Is it important?
It's
It's
entertainment. Yes, it's entertainment, but it is a periphery of life, it's
entertainment with the edge, the sharp, pointy bit of holding power to account through humour.
No, I don't think so. I disagree with you. I don't think that's what I do. I don't think that's what I do. I think not what I do. I'm sure others might lay claim to that, but
no, it's like the cartoonist. You highlight, you magnify the absurdity, which hopefully shames people in power.
Doesn't do it though, does it?
Well, it's not working at the moment.
It never works. I think.
Peter Cook would be on the fringe. That changed British society, I think.
Well, certainly the face of comedy changed as a result of Peter Cook, but I think he himself, said that when he was opening the establishment club in Soho, said, "Well, we're doing what so much German cabaret did to prevent the rise of Hitler and Nazi Germany." Yeah, so I think he admitted that satire was a bit of a furphy, and I think it is. I think it. If you look at Working Dog doing
Utopia,
even Frontline.
Yep.
Which you might be too young to remember, but it was It was a scathing, well, not you, obviously. It was a scathing satire on commercial public current affairs television, and it didn't change a thing. Just the very fact that everyone was alerted to how ludicrous it all was made no difference. It just continued on and still continues on.
Yeah. And it was a bit of a documentary.
Question for the audience.
Well, just to answer what you're saying, so don't undervalue that. This changes hearts and minds and the way people think. So as a viewer, as I grew up with Frontline as a young person, and now as an older person watching you on Matters Health, don't undersell the amount of impact and change it has in us, the viewers, in the ways that we see things. We may not have seen what you're talking about, and now we do in a very different light, and it's really neat. And when you go and think about it the next day, you do have a laugh. It's totally entertaining, and satire is fantastic. But then when you think about it again, after the show on your own, in the news, in another context, you've changed. You've changed your thoughts about it. So don't underestimate the value of any of that.
What you're really saying is that if we're in a mess, it's Shaun's fault.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well,
Totally. It's your fault.
The thing I worry about is that people might watch our show or might watch a similar show and say, oh, it's been pointed out. Oh, something's been done. That's great.
That should fix it.
That's right. Open rather than play a piano and sing a song about it, they won't drop the piano on somebody, in a march. They'll just sit back and think, problem solved. That's what I worry about, is that it gives people the false sense that things are going to change or things have changed, just simply because they're aware of it.
But you shouldn't at the same time underestimate, and I think we've got lots of heads nodding, that it does have an impact, even if you're not instantly aware of it.
Well, look, over the years, I've watched a lot of Question Time in Parliament, and I can't see it as anything positive anymore. I see the joins too much. I think maybe that's what we pick up, is the fact that, oh, that's been pointed out to us. Oh, he or she does that when they answer a question or don't answer a question. Oh, that's a pivot. We all know what a pivot is now. We all know what
the deflection, a dissemblance, and so on. But it's a target-rich environment, politics at the moment. We've never needed your insights and your skewering more than we need it now. Something's gone horribly wrong, don't you think?
Well, I don't know whether. Well, maybe. If you say so, then I agree. I thought it was just me. I thought I was the only one becoming increasingly cynical watching it, thinking how terrible it was, how terrible it is.
I'm determined not to become cynical, but I'm deeply frustrated.
Well,
there doesn't seem to be any accountability for anything anymore, and we're being treated like goldfish with 3-second memories, with 3-second memories, with 3-second memories.
And well, you know what I think would work? You know what I would like to see? This is why radio is so much better than television, is because an interview can go on as long as it needs to go on.
Yep.
And there was an episode of 7:30 not that long ago where an interview went far longer than I think the subject was expecting it to go. And I can't remember who was being interviewed now. But it went on for about 15 minutes, and usually those interviews go on 8 minutes. And everybody is so aware of how long the interview is going to last that they'll just
try and outrun the time.
Yeah, they'll just play down the clock, and they know what's going on. The interviewer knows what's going on.
It's like a dance.
It's a wearying dance. Even Kerry O'Brien back in his day had this fatigued look on his face. When certain answers started in certain ways, he knew what he was going to get, and there was a weariness to it. On radio, and I would like to see this on television too, I think a show should run an hour if it needs to run an hour, 45 minutes if it needs to run 45 minutes, 2 hours if it needs to run 2 hours.
Like a Dan Andrews press conference.
It should be as long as it needs to be. And I think with multiple platforms, there's no reason it can't be.
Yep.
It could run 4 seconds if it wanted to.
Television could do that if it wanted to. It's so controlled. It never lets itself do that. You've got shows like Q&A that's live, but it's very stage managed.
Yeah, I think that, yes. I won't be suggesting the way to run Q&A, but a show like Q&A probably could...
One just like Q&A.
One just like it. Probably could afford just to occasionally just have one question.
Yep.
And just see what happens.
Yep.
And let that run itself out. Actually dare to be a little bit dull.
You are, and Madam, no, sorry, you are old enough to remember there was a format back in the day called Monday Conference with Bob Moore. And for younger members of the viewing audience, both here and on the broadcast, the idea was the exact opposite of Q&A. You didn't get people who just had opinions. You actually got people who knew shit.
Yes.
And they disagreed with each other, and they would slug it out with one host who would be the moderator, who was very well briefed and could call out nonsense when it was being spouted.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And the idea that you would spend half an hour on one issue with two people who actually know what they're talking about and test each other to the limit, that's gone.
I wouldn't recommend you do it now, but to do the YouTube Monday conference, Bob Hawke, I think when he was ACTU leader, he turned up a little worse for wear.
A bit Barnaby Joyce?
Totally Barnaby Joyce he was, but to not to nil effect. I mean, I actually think, it was a very compelling piece of television.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see how it plays now, but I think it had a lot of force and bite to it.
I'd see the fact that you remember it, 30 years on?
Yeah.
Tells you everything
It was
you
an
need to know.
astonishing piece of television.
We've become very risk averse in our media.
Well, we've become very savvy. I mean, the very things that you guys can pick up when you watch a question not being answered in an interview is known only too well by the person answering the question. I mean, I think probably politicians were a little more naive back in the day about how they were appearing. They wouldn't have had media advisors. There would be no such thing. There was no slickness to it at all. I don't think you can get back there from here. I don't think there's any way of doing that. But
they all had media advisors. Tony Edelson advised Malcolm Fraser. I'm trying to think how far back I can go. Barry Cassidy advised Bob Hawke, and then Gough Whitlam had media advisors, although I can't for the moment remember who they were. But they always had them, but they weren't as good at outplaying the media as I think they are now.
Mm.
And I think the media, in fact, needs to lift its game. And I say that fully aware that there is nothing more tedious than someone who's left a job starting to pontificate about how much better things used to be in the day, and I don't want to be that person. But I do think that there's a real need for a bit more rigor.
Mm.
I'll leave it at that. What do you consume as a media consumer, not as a supplier?
Well, I only, and this is from my days, I used to do a show called Newstopia on SBS. It was 10 o'clock on a Wednesday, 10:05, 10:10 some nights on a Wednesday. And it was really the first time that I started watching the news, because it was that was a news parody show as opposed to a news satire show. We were parodying the form. I think over 3 seasons that wore off, because you run out of things to parody about the way people do things and start talking about what they're saying. So I was watching SBS News because it had obviously had a world view. It was presenting the world news, and the conceit of Newstopia was that Australia didn't have as much of a stake in the rest of the world, so it could afford to give people advice. And so I watched SBS News and noted it down, and I still do that. I don't
watch SBS.
I just watch SBS. I don't watch too much else to get news. I mean, at work, when I'm doing Mad as Hell, I watch as much Vision as I can. But back in the days of Newstopia, which was not that long ago, 2009, I was reading transcripts from off the internet. There were the availability of clips wasn't such that it is today.
Mm.
So as a consumer now, I watch SBS.
Do you look at physical newspapers or just online?
No, I promised myself I would never just look at newspapers online. I had some weird...
And you've stuck to that?
Promise. No, not at all. No, that was what my intention was, but it just fell away. With the best of intentions, it's fallen away. And now I don't read the newspapers even on the weekend anymore.
Not even online?
No, not online at all. I will search for a topic or something, usually that I've picked up in social media, which I always am a bit skeptical about. If I read something, somebody said something on social media, some politician said something, I think, has that been properly contextualized? And it's 360 characters or whatever. And then I'll go to the source and I'll make sure I do a bit of archaeology. Again, that's a habit from doing Mad as Hell, is I make sure that we don't perpetuate some piece of crap that somebody said that isn't true.
That's fact checking, but Twitter?
Twitter's a sort of a flag for me when it says, here's the topic, here's something someone said, and then I'll use that as an entry point. Yes. Instagram? No, not at all. Facebook? No, never done it. Never done it? No. Conscientious objector? No, I just don't understand. I mean, I've only recently, maybe in the last 3 years, embraced Twitter as a way of communicating, plugging things and That's quite a fun thing. So I try and do one a day. Try and make it a joke usually.
Yep. And I enjoy them. But Twitter is also very good as a filter. But the trouble is, of course, because you're curating your own feed, it narrows your experience. You start living life on a tram line.
Yes.
You can't wander around like trams can't wander around.
I think if that's the only thing you do, if that's your only window, you're in a bit of trouble.
Well, that's where we've got to. It's part of the problem, isn't it, these days? And people's blinkers are constant. Their social media blinkers are on, which limits the diversity of what they're being fed.
There's a lot of, I don't know if you've noticed this, there's a lot of people arguing on Twitter. Have you noticed that? There's some people respond to your tweets and they get a bit cross. That's a different point of view. I'm very interested. Often they're people who don't follow you. I'm curious as to how they find out you said something. Is that, do they search the topic, or are they stalking you? I don't quite work out.
Some of that, but also you don't control your television program and who watches it. Anyone can watch it. And you also don't control who looks at what you put on Twitter. It's up to them. And likewise, you don't know who's going to buy a newspaper and so on. So people end up redistributing off into all sorts of little maze of cul-de-sacs, which may be in places you didn't even know existed.
I see. Right, that's how it works.
Scary, isn't it? Yeah.
No, it's good. I don't mind.
Still inviting questions and contributions if you want, but I've got any number of them here. What is it about lawyers in the arts? Are all lawyers frustrated performers? Asks, I think it's Irene. The margin's a bit squashy here.
Well, I can't speak for all performers or all lawyers, but I suppose they might not necessarily be frustrated. Lawyers might not be frustrated.
No.
Performers, they might be very happy performing in the role that they've picked. As I said,
it is performative. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it is. Oh, absolutely.
Although if you're sitting in an office every day doing stamp duty amendments, it's not that performative, is it?
Well, I guess, yeah. I mean, it's not a fused profession here, is it? You've got to choose to be a solicitor or a barrister. How many of you guys want to stand up in court, or
who wants to be a mouthpiece? Yeah, there's a few hands going up. About
this gentleman.
Okay, some have. Yeah, so there's about a quarter of them, but solicitors do have a right to appear, and more, particularly outside of the CBD, in regional places and in suburban courts. A lot of solicitors do appearance work, and some do it almost full time. Yeah,
I do. As a person who enjoyed speaking in court and who enjoys performing now, I'm at a loss to see what the appeal would be if you didn't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose some people are driven by social justice and cause and that sort of thing. I wasn't. I was very selfish, I think, in the way that I viewed the law. It was just a means to an end, really.
Oh, well, I mean, you use it while it uses you, isn't that the transaction?
Yeah. Well, I thought, well, I'll just do what I'm capable of doing. This seems like an easy thing to do, and I did it for 10 years. After
you ever left, did you ever think of going back?
I remember when I did a TV show on Channel 9 when you were children, most of you, called Micallef Tonight. It was a talk show. Ostensibly, I'd never done a talk show in my life. I'd done a fake talk show on the ABC, and some Nine executives had seen it, or bits of it, and thought that it was a real one. So I was given the job. It was an awful, terrible show. Anyway, I got axed after 13 episodes, and I went on a holiday and came back with the family, and I was at the airport loading the stuff off the carousel, and Jeff Kennett was loading stuff off the carousel next to me, and he said, "Oh, like in that way that you know people." I've never met him in my life, but he knew who I was and I knew who he was. He said, "So you're going back to the law?" I could have asked him the same question.
No, the law came after him actually on a few occasions, and yes, well, let's not get distracted by that.
This is going out. People are seeing this.
Yeah. That's okay. That's okay. I don't mind. Every word's true and can be justified. But it's kind of handy because I don't know whether your parents were as judgmental as mine, but having the meal ticket and having the fallback was always regarded as something worthwhile. And for years and years in my work in the media, it was regarded as a diversion. It was regarded as a detour and some sort of indulgence that I had to work out of my system before I went back to my true calling of the law.
Well, this is your parents' point of
My
view?
parents very much.
Did you share it
No.
some nights?
No. I mean, I started off thinking I'd go and I went to the ABC as the law report producer presenter in order to kind of use my expertise. And I thought, well, I'll go and do that for a while and try and be as successful as Norman Swan is doing the health report. And after a while, the ABC actually said, no, we're going to Shanghai you over and get you to start doing talk radio because we think you'll be half good at it. Although when they sacked me, I thought I'd go back to the law. And in fact, at one stage, I was looking at an office when my phone rang and someone said, do you want to come back to radio?
Oh,
and I was looking to sign a lease that day.
How long had passed?
6 years. I'd done 6 years of radio.
Right.
And then I'd been chewed up and spat out. And did a year of television on The Investigators. But the point, rather than this turning into a kind of, what did you do, what did I do? It's more about it's there in the background, which is kind of, I don't know, maybe it's the sort of, Jewish boy insecurity in me, but this is the sort of, well, it's always there if I need it.
Yeah, I think as a fallback position, it makes sense with you and your choices. I think I've destroyed any gravitas that I might have. I don't think I could.
No.
I don't think I could enter politics. I don't think I could.
There's a question.
Be a
We've
lawyer.
got that one here. Yeah.
What would I enter politics?
Yeah. Could you please run against XYZ?
Okay. Well, XYZ sounds like an easy beat. I would run. I was actually, when I was watching the new speaker in the House of Representatives, I thought I would love to run. I'd have to tell the electorate that I wasn't going to help them at all because I would ultimately just want to be the speaker. So there would be no vote, and I wouldn't be of any use to them at all. But I would genuinely swat up on the rules and regulations and make sure.
Unlike the incumbent,
I don't think he's bothered.
No,
I'm assuming that he's a placeholder. I'm assuming that he's not. This is not an audition for the gig for next year, because if it is, he's been terribly advised and has made a complete hash of it. But I mean, either that or Governor General. I'd be happy to put my hand or Governor of the state. These are pipe dreams, but we'll get to them. I'm a young man.
We know people, We know people who know people too.
Well, I don't know. How could I possibly become governor? Sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
It wasn't advertised. Sorry.
Bribe a lot of people.
No, you don't bribe.
I think I've got to be a sports hero, don't I?
No. Linda Dessau is a former judge who is the governor of Victoria at the moment. Before that, it was De Kretzer, who was an eminent professor. Before that, Sir James Gobbo, who's sadly just died and been buried, who was a Supreme Court judge. So,
but have to be good at something. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I think being fair to middling, which is my,
Alex Chernov, who was a Supreme Court judge, also. So you could get the regal fanfare played every time you walk into a room.
I think you got more chance of being the governor than me.
And I've got none.
Okay.
So that means you've got less than none. Let's go through when you were. We've talked about this before, but in a different context. When you were that enthusiastic law student playing with footlights in Adelaide, what were the influences in the way that you are now an influence to this generation? What were the influences that inspired you?
Well, I was a creature of television. So for me, it was, in fact, the whole appeal of joining the Footlights Club, or we used to do footlight shows and law student society shows, and there wasn't really much difference between them, except
like a law review.
Yeah, law review, where we would they'd always misspell it. They would always spell it REVIEW. It's wrong. It's just wrong.
Well, that's a joke within a joke within a joke.
Maybe it was a joke. I don't know. I didn't find it amusing at all. Anyway, look. So for me, it was like, these wonderful performers that ended up becoming Monty Python, or Peter Cook's been mentioned, or Dudley Moore, or there's Oxford graduates that ended up pursuing careers. Stephen Fry, Tim Brooke Taylor. Yes, I mean, in fact, the Cambridge troupe came out. They're a couple of years older than us, and it was Fry, and it was Emma Thompson, and it was Hugh Laurie. They came out and did a show and invited us to go along to see it, and then attend a party with them afterwards. And I was too jealous to do it. I just said no. I said, I'm not going to bother seeing that show.
But you'd been consuming Monty Python,
yes,
the Goons, the Marx Brothers, the lineage.
Oh, sure. Yeah, like so it would be it was that Oxbridge group, and then before that it was any bit of comedy at all was enough to
American
inspire me.
as well?
Yeah, the American stuff was mainly movies, I guess, movies and television. And for
Lenny
me,
Bruce?
no, I didn't. No, he was a bit hard to see. He was a bit hard to
He was foul
come
mouthed
across.
as well. Woody
That's
Allen
right.
stand up?
Well, Woody Allen was, yes, absolutely. So I would essentially spend all my TEAS money, my tertiary education allowance scheme money, on comedy records.
So we could start doing the Moose routine,
Yeah, sure.
and you would remember it word for
I
word.
shut-
Go
What's
and get.
the line? The opening line was, "I shot a moose. I was in upstate New York." Actually, it's not very. It doesn't play well to do Woody Allen these days, does it?
No, it's still funny.
It is very. It is a hilarious
If
sketch.
you're not familiar with Woody Allen doing stand up, and we're talking about late 60s, early 70s, I reckon. Carnegie Hall. I've got the vinyl. I can't remember.
I
the
think
year.
probably The Hungry Eye. Probably it might have been The Hungry Eye. Or
It is still, and it stands up.
Yeah.
It is still some of the funniest stand-up you'll ever hear.
First line, "I shot a moose." Last line is, "But they got the Berkowitzes."
And in between,
There's a lot of laughs.
There's a lot of laughs.
A lot of setup in there.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah. Louder.
Were you interested in satire and political comedy at that age, or was that something that you were interested in later in life?
And so just for the purpose of the microphone, were you interested in satire and comedy, political comedy then, or did it come later in life?
It came later. I didn't follow it at all. I mean, oddly enough, I watched Max Gillies, who did a great show called The Gillies Report, and that was on while I was at university. But I did watch that, but I watched it just because he was funny. I don't think I sort of was aware of the satirical that much with that show. In fact, even with our show with Mad as Hell, we don't tend to do. We only set up as much of the joke as we need to. Like we'll only tell the audience as much as they need the headline, or we're not really about educating the audience. It's just a setup for the joke.
But you assume a fair amount of knowledge.
We assume that the audience on the ABC has probably watched 7:30 and the news. So
they'll get the gags about, well, now Amanda Stoker. I mean, how extraordinary is that you have a character who has now appeared in real life after your character?
I know, yeah, that is astonishing. Yeah, we do. For those of you who don't know in the audience, we have a character called Dramella Burt, which we introduced in 2012, who looks exactly like Amanda Stoker, who didn't get into Parliament until 2019, 2018.
I think Queensland, isn't she?
Yeah.
Conservative senator.
I'm convinced.
And she's a twin to the character.
She wears the same clothes. The hair is the same. I'm convinced she got her look from our show.
No, it helped her get pre-selection probably.
Well, I'm puzzling over that one. That is that you don't get that lucky in life.
No.
That has to be someone's deliberate choice, and it wasn't ours.
No.
So I'm assuming it's Amanda's.
Has she ever been in touch?
No. It's funny. I've only ever been rung once by a politician who took exception to the way. In this case,
Peter Dutton.
it wasn't. No, Peter Dutton. Not heard from Peter Dutton.
Okay.
I'm not aware.
Matthias Coleman.
Well,
He came on your show.
he came on the show. He liked the show. He said to me in a text once. He said, "I like the show," in brackets, mostly smiley face emoticon. But he was good enough in his final week to appear on our show and say goodbye, which was very nice. But we don't usually do that. I don't like the idea of the show being co-opted by the actual psychopaths that make up the political class. But it was nice enough.
Breaks down the barriers.
Well, it makes it hard to be mean to them if you like them. So I don't really want to meet them.
Don't have to like them just because you meet them, though.
At the same time, Thatcher enjoyed Yes Minister, so politicians can enjoy satire. So it's nice to see everyone's getting along and having a good time.
Yeah, and they're driven by vanity, of course.
Yes, much in the way that they'll go and buy the original cartoon by Spooner or something of them and put it up on their wall.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I notice that in the background of some shots when someone's being, presenting something from their office. So the only time there's only one complaint, and I don't know how this senator got my phone number. I didn't actually have the wherewithal. It rang up. There were a number of calls that came through, unknown number, which I just let go. And then Sunday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, I got another call. And I thought, this could be Sunday morning, 8 o'clock. This could be serious. And it's, Bill Heffernan rings me up and took exception to the fact.
New South Wales, old guard, farmer, rough, rugged, but
head
very
kicker.
much
He'd be
to the
happy.
point.
He'd be happy to call himself a head kicker. He was a numbers crunching guy. He'd get things done. And the reason we made a joke about him was because we thought he's a man who can look after himself. He's not going to be offended by this, en passant slap in the head as we go through. And he took exception to it, and I listened to him, and I wasn't going to argue that he shouldn't be offended because he was offended. And I said, well, I'm very sorry that it offended you. And it did make me think about ad hominem attacks on people or even little slaps. And we, as much as we can, we avoid them as much as possible. We rather deal with hopefully what's being said and done rather than the way in which it's said or the way in which it's done or the amusing effect we think. I mean, obviously, in the case of Clive Palmer, you've got we'll just make those jokes all the time, but they're too irresistible. But he's the only one who's complained as far as I'm aware, and I've never had any complaints from management.
That was a personal complaint to you. It wasn't a formal complaint to the ABC complaints process.
No, I've never had that.
Which has just been itself in the news this week.
Yes, no, we've never had that as far as I'm aware. I'm sure
you should be grateful.
We would have been
someone
told.
who survived a few of those, they're a grueling thing.
Well, we're a lot more responsible than you were on radio.
Undoubtedly.
Actually, that has come in handy. Just kind of as part of my instinct. I know defamation law, and the ABC editorial policy is something that you should look at when you work there. And instinctively, I'm able to navigate that without too much bother. Although it does depend on the climate. Sometimes it gets a little hot, and suddenly particularly somebody who's a bit litigious, if they're in your script, then there'll be a little more scrutiny put on the material than there would be if it was somebody else. I find that interesting. If you kick up enough dust and you make enough noise in the outside world, in politics, it can actually have a self-censoring effect.
Absolutely. And a big cheerio to Peter Dutton tonight too. So one of the issues that arises there, of course, is that the lawyer who advises themselves has a fool for a client. It's one of my favourite sayings, but it's very tempting all the time to do that. And it's partly pride, don't you think, where you kind of think, well, I should know this. I'm in the media, I'm legally trained, I'm qualified, I'm experienced. I don't need to ring the legal department to check this. I know what I'm doing here. I don't need a second opinion.
There's a certain amount of that. I think there's also a certain amount of responsibility to do that as well and back up your own judgment on it. I mean, I'm not sure I would exclude anybody else's opinion. I'd probably be quite happy to have a round table or run. I mean, it's out of your hands anyway, because every script that we write on Mad as Hell is looked at by the legal department.
It's a pity about that. Have you ever been sued?
I've never been sued. And I doubt for him, I think I'm perceived as too nice a guy to sue. I don't think I would be sued. I'd be very surprised if I was sued. You didn't talk about defamation here, I'm assuming.
Or anything else.
Or anything else.
But particularly defamation from a broadcasting point of view, it is a perpetual risk.
Yes.
And it's always something you're aware of. We're aware of it now. I can say cheerio to Peter Dutton. That's not defamatory because he has just settled the defamation action. So it's defensible, it's verifiable, it's entirely within context. But the very fact that in a nanosecond all that goes through my head before I make that quip shows you how aware we are of the perils.
Yes. I'm not sure that part of me, there's a lot of objection buzzing around about our defamation laws here in Australia. And I know people who have been victims of defamation law actions and also people who have brought them. My instinct is to defend them, is to defend our defamation laws.
As they stand now.
Yeah. In the absence of anything else, I think they're a pretty good bunch of laws. And so often I hear criticism of them, but I don't hear any viable alternative being put.
Well, the biggest flaw, I think, with them is the expense of enforcing them or using them. It's almost impossible for ordinary citizens, unless you're involved in a love-rattle relationship, as we saw in the county court last week. Did everybody follow that? It was hilarious. It was a couple that had a falling out and they both went at each other, hammer and tongs, until somehow they ran out of money. But it was after 4 or 5 days in court accusing each other of serial infidelity and all sorts of skullduggery. It was hilarious. But, most people can't do that or won't do that.
No, but that's it. What you're describing is part of the problem, is that as soon as it gets a little bit like that, as soon as it's, because we all love gossip, and that's all news
Speak
is.
for yourself.
We all love it. We're all say how terrible it is, but we'll still listen to it.
Of course we do.
But social media makes it extraordinarily difficult to have those legal actions brought and not discussed. I mean, it just gets away from you so quickly. So it's not so much a problem with the law, it's just a problem with the world we live in now. Finds it very difficult to accommodate that law.
Yep.
And it's not my job, so I haven't spent 24 hours a day trying to think of a solution to it. But it feels like it's always going to be a problem.
Well, it always is. The cost of access to justice is a perennial problem.
Yes.
And, I spent 3 years at Fitzroy Legal Service between 84, 5, 6, 7, 3 years in there. And we used to rant and rave about it then, and people had ranted and raved about it before then, and they're still ranting and raving about it. And I'm not sure that it's getting any easier or better. In fact, it's probably getting worse. And there's no quick answer. There's no easy solution. And, we constantly create tribunals where people represent themselves, but then someone comes in and gets leave to be represented. It becomes an uneven contest again. And it's really interesting. People with an adversarial system say, oh, maybe we should try a more inquisitorial system. And people who come from an inquisitorial system say, oh, no, we so admire the adversarial system, we should move to that. And
why do they like, what's appealing about the adversarial system to those used to the other system?
Well, whatever you see as the flaws and failings of
Okay.
your own system,
Yes.
you think they can be solved by changing the culture and changing, some of the settings, but sort of grass is greener on the other side. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a way of trying to avoid fixing things by saying, oh, no, it's the system that's wrong. It can't be fixed.
Do you think bringing
In fact,
back wigs and gowns would help?
Stocks.
Stocks as well.
Yeah.
I think there's enough of that in a metaphorical sense out there anyway, don't you think?
I think Fed Square's perfectly suited to it. And
I should do something with it.
Well, I'd like to just nominate a few people who we could trial it with, actually, and we could just make a start and see how we go. Well, and in so making that gag, we have moved a long way. If you step back, it's not that things are just always getting worse. We could get terribly negative and down in the mouth about it, but in fact, things do consistently get better and better, don't they? And you look at the way, I'd rather have our legal system than Vladimir Putin in Russia or, suppression in Hong Kong of human rights.
That's surprising coming from a man who used to work for the ABC.
Yeah. And, suppression of human rights in Hong Kong is teaching us a hell of a lesson too. Things that people had taken for granted that they thought were there into perpetuity suddenly have gone. So, it comes as an incredible shock.
Well, and there's nowhere to hide now. With news being the way it is and with access to clippage being the way it is, you can't hide anything. There's just too much of it. That's the problem now. There's just too much of it to process that people will turn off, or they'll rely entirely on their feed, which gets back to your original point about the nature of social media.
Well, all media and social media being a subset of it. One of the things that, I'll come to your question, if there's other people in particular who haven't yet asked one who want to, break your duck. You've only got another, 12 minutes or so. Bugbear of mine, anonymity on social media, I think is one of the core evils. The fact that anyone can say anything about anybody else and not be held accountable for it because they've got this disguise. It's like, when bank robbers wear a disguise so they can't be identified. Well, social media allows it. It permits that in a way that then people think, oh, well, I can just suddenly be threatening or abusive or violent or aggressive or whatever it might be. Whereas in real life, and there's a great story, Shane Jacobson was being trolled online, and he then devoted a day to going through and tracking down his troll and piercing the veil of anonymity by going back through that person's feed and gradually working out, they obviously live in this town. Now, what work? Find what they do this work. Okay, there's only 4 of those sorts of professionals in that town. It's one of them. Let's go through. And then he worked out who it was, and he rang the guy out of the blue. And he said, yeah, it's Shane Jacobson here. You've been saying a few things about me. He tells this great story. It's long and I can't do it justice at the moment, and couldn't do it justice no matter how long I had, actually. But he got an apology from this guy who said, I never thought it mattered.
That's because he's playing a character, that guy, isn't he?
Yep.
So it's not just wearing a mask. It's not just being anonymous. It's actually allowing themselves to be it's acting, allowing themselves to embody somebody who's angry about this topic or who can...
Their other bad self.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, if we're a dichotomy, then they can reach down as deeply as they want to into themselves and pull out this dark person for whom there is no responsibility for their action, no consequences at all.
Yep. And we've enabled that.
Yeah.
We've enabled that, and we've said to the richest people in the world they are now, who have created this monster, that you're not regulated. You can do whatever you like. You can get away with it. We've got no rules. It's the Wild West.
Well, the very thing that reminds us of our humanity is being able to look into the eyes of the person talking to you. And so you don't say certain things because you can see the person's vulnerable, or you can see the person is a nice person, or you can see the person has other issues, and all that disappears and on social media. I don't know how you undo that.
Oh, you regulate it. I'll give you a quick example.
Yeah, okay.
This is my hobby, so it's my strong suit here. When her Daimler and her Benz met and came together and brought the internal combustion engine together with a cart, and they created the horseless carriage, a self-propelling carriage. My goodness, who'd ever thought or conceived of such a thing? It was the 1890s, but it took another 15 to 20 years before there were road rules, insurance, registration, and licensing. And we're at that stage now. We've invented the machine, but we haven't worked out how to regulate it. And as always, we're chasing after the technology.
We have to go through a bit more hell before we start getting solutions.
We do, and Henry Ford was one of the most vociferous opponents of regulation of the car. He was making his fortune from it. He didn't want it regulated. It was complete self-interest. Mark Zuckerberg is doing exactly the same nonsense. Don't regulate Facebook. Don't regulate the internet. Oh my goodness, you'll be inhibiting progress. Bullshit. You'll just be inhibiting the amassing of an unimaginable fortune. And why do we listen to him on whether he should be regulated or not? He's the last person we should listen to on whether he should be regulated or not. Look at all the damage it causes. Anyway. There you are. I got that off my chest. I feel much better already. Yes, gentleman here's got a contribution. Please yell out for the microphone.
Yeah. Hi, Jon. Hi, Shaun. Speaking of social media, how much do you two know about TikTok?
TikTok. Well, I know TikTok exists, and yeah, I don't participate. I don't even watch it. But
but we will be extracting a little bit of this and putting it on there. Yeah.
So propaganda artists are getting very creative on TikTok. Hansen just got her cartoon series.
Yep.
Oh yes, I saw a bit of that. Not funny. Not funny.
The terrible part is those parties of these officials from those parties are using clips from that series because the whole thing portrays one side corrupted, the other side with mentally challenged. So is that something we should fear or should we laugh at?
Well, should we laugh? That's always a tough question. Should we laugh at certain things? Because it's a gut reaction. So you say a lot about yourself or what you laugh at. You do literally drop your guard, I think.
But slapstick's always been based on people either hurting themselves or someone else. Three Stooges. I mean, come on. So it's been in humour. Probably if you go and have a look at the walls in Pompeii or wherever else in ancient times, it would have been the same.
Yeah, I mean, I used to do a character years ago called Milo Kerrigan. Now, you would be too young to know Milo Kerrigan. It was in Full Frontal, that's right, yes.
You had him just the other year.
Shh, but I wouldn't. It's been pretty hard to defend the character. In this case, it was a punch-drunk boxer who, some might say that he had brain damage. And so, but it was a clown character. I feel very uncomfortable about it now because there's so many legitimate criticisms that you could level at it. So other people just find it gut funny, so they'll just laugh at it.
But there's lots of stuff now, and I'm not getting into a cancel culture debate. There's a lot of stuff that we would have grown up laughing at, Benny Hill stuff, which would just be completely flat, if not just get you into trouble now.
Yeah, I mean, as a comedian, my job is to muster an audience. Whether it's 20 people or whether it's 500,000 people, you got to read the room. And if your joke is not going to land anymore because times have changed, then you drop the joke. There's absolutely no point in doing it. You don't go and die on a hill explaining insisting that it's funny when it's not.
So who makes you laugh now?
Well, actually I just watched all 30 Rock again. That's pretty funny to me. That's very funny.
The young ones.
Preppers is pretty funny. What's that?
The young ones. You put a sketch in last season.
We did.
Yes,
So that's true.
But I'm thinking more of the new and emerging talent. Are there people that you're watching, whether you're mentoring formally or informally, but are there people coming through you say, this is where it's going?
Well, no, as mentioned, Preppers. I mean, that's the most recent example of something that I've watched that's new, and that makes me laugh, and mainly entirely because they're funny people doing funny things.
Yep.
And there's no intellectualizing it for me. If someone's funny, then I like them. I really do. I'm suddenly emotionally invested in them, and I like them. And in my experience, whenever I've seen someone who's made me laugh, and then later on in life, whether it's a big star or whether it's not a big star, meet them in real life. Usually, I feel like I know them, and they don't you can't hide, you can't fake it. With dramatic acting, I think you probably could be a terrible person and still, move somebody in a dramatic performance. You probably could do it. You probably could fake your way through it, but you can't do it in comedy. There's nowhere to hide.
No, there isn't. It's pretty straightforward. Can we just pause for a moment and talk about the ABC? It's been your home now for more than a decade for Matters Held, but you have worked for other organisations, networks, commercial networks. You've worked in theatres, all sorts of other things. I've never known the ABC to be under as much stress and strain and pressure as it is now.
I certainly get a sense that we have to be very careful with the resources, by which I mean that we're greatly privileged to have access to them with our show, and our show being around for so long. And I feel even guilty doing it because I've had a good run, and I feel like it might be, there's so few resources, I feel like we should give them over to somebody else. It's a pity to think that way. It's a pity there can't be like 100 shows on that are like ours, but there's only a couple of opportunities per year to fund them. And then the main reason for that is because the light entertainment vehicles like the Weekly or, most of what you see during the week, Hard Quiz, all of those shows have to be paid out of the licence fee. So there's no access to funding from Screen Australia or any of the funding bodies. They're made entirely out of what the ABC can scrape together to make a show. And that's why you watch a show that you like and you think, why is there only 7 episodes? Or why is there only 6 the next year? It's because there's not enough money.
The rubber band can only stretch so far.
That's the pressure I'm seeing at the moment.
And the reality for anyone who's ever worked in any part of the ABC, radio, television, online, anything at all, city, country, capital city, doesn't matter. The ABC only exists on the unpaid overtime of the staff. And there is not a single person who works at the ABC who clocks on and clocks off the way you do in many organisations, public and private sector. Everyone works there, whether even in the accounts department, people do what they have to do to keep the place going.
Yeah.
And sometimes to an extraordinary degree.
Yeah. And that's not available on a spreadsheet of the Senate Estimates Committee.
No.
And, unfortunately.
Yep.
As the recent claim for unpaid overtime shows.
Which was from, in certain areas, yes. I mean, there are people who, if you're covering a bushfire and you're doing 15-hour days and your shift is for 8, you kind of go, I can't keep doing this forever. But there's all sorts of other issues. But let's not just get too carried away.
No, you do. You go overtime for the love.
Yeah.
Well, we do it all the time.
Yep.
Half an hour extra. Is that okay with everybody? Yeah, sure. You get some people making jokes, but they'll do it.
Yep.
Otherwise, we'd be a few hours short every season.
And was that a hint you were dropping before when you were saying, "Oh, look, there's other people and the resources need to be shared around"?
Well, I would love to mentor. I mean, I'd do it for nothing. I'd be, in the old days, the ABC used to train up all the, directors and camera people and sound people who were at commercial TV back in the 90s and the 2000s were all trained up 10 years earlier at the ABC. They used to have this program they did in the summer holidays. Ted Emery used to run it, I think, where it was an unofficial film and television school, and sadly, they don't do that anymore.
No.
So I would encourage, and I would foster, and I would put my hand up to mentor any young person who wanted to do a comedy program at the ABC. In fact, we did suggest, it never went anywhere, but we did suggest that it might be a nice idea to build into the budget just an extra show, which you wouldn't use for the series, but basically economies of scale would mean that you'd have enough money to spend a week making something, a pilot, with some young people, just on the back end of every production.
Give them the chance.
Yeah.
Like apprentices. Very quickly, as we run out of time, what advice then would you give people who want to take your career path?
Well, the audience is the best editor of anyone's interested in comedy. The audience is the best editor of material. They aren't invested in you so much that they'll laugh at everything you say. So, because I often get people saying, "How do I get into television?" I think that's probably the step beyond what you need to first do, which is get in front of an audience, and that's been very difficult during COVID. But that's the whole point of it.
Yep.
That's the whole point, as an audience.
Do it. Don't talk about it. Don't dream about it. Actually go out and do it. We've got a very lucky bunch of people here. Can you all thank Shaun Micallef?
Thank you, John. Thanks for coming in.
And on behalf of the thousands of other people who are watching the broadcast and will continue to watch it as it stays online, thousands, weren't you told? I want to say thank you, and I have to also confess that the week is never complete when you're not on, and when you are there, the week is not complete until your show's been consumed either live to air or on iView. Look, thank you very much for joining us. Next Thursday, but at lunchtime, not at this time, at lunchtime, Judge Jennifer Coate. Jenny Coate is a contemporary of mine. We're at law school together and we've been friends ever since. I won't pretend that's a formal interview I'm going to do, but she was the coroner during the bushfires. She was president of the Children's Court. She did the hotel quarantine inquiry. She was a Royal Commissioner on the Institutional Abuse, Sexual Abuse Royal Commission. There are so many topics to discuss with Jenny. I can't wait. That's next Thursday for the fourth and final for this year of our Monash Law In Conversation series. I hope you'll join us then. Thank you for joining us tonight, and good night.